Hey everyone, I'm Ermysenigma, welcome back to my channel and welcome to Monster Analysis. Up for analysis today is Fightreer. General Altus once said, "I would trust Fightreer with my life," and so would every creature in this forest because they all know Fightreer protects them ferociously. He carries 2 axes he stole from a wood company as a reminder that he's not to be messed with. Here we have Fightreer as a child, as a teen, as an adult. Overall, I really like this monster design. I think it's one of the most amazing designs. And with that being said, you should know that as of the time recording this video, there are a total of 20 nature legendary monsters, so I'm going to be comparing Fightreer to the remaining 19 nature monsters. Starting things off with power, Fightreer has a power of 3,454, which actually puts him in 5th place along with Kiridar, thus potentially making him one of the strongest nature attackers. As for his life, he has a life of 29,556, which puts him in 8th place along with monsters like Nemestrinus and Lao Mu, so it's about an average life. His speed on the other hand is 3,377, which actually puts him tied for 14th place with the Judgments, so he's kind of on the slow end. And as for his trait, he is immune to poison, which a lot of nature monsters actually tend to have as a trait. Now there's a good thing and a bad thing to this. The fact that Fightreer is an attacker, I guess it's good that he's immune to poison, because poison reduces a monster's damage output by 19%, so being an attacker you really don't want to have your damage output reduced. But at the same time, there's quite a few nature monsters that can actually stun you, and there's Lao Mu who can possess you. So it's kind of better to have a trait with immunity to stun or possession, because yes, although having your damage output reduced sucks, being denied sucks a whole lot more. Although I will say that thanks to one of his skills, Lao Mu isn't too much of a problem in terms of possessing. I'll talk about that a little later on. So anyways, moving on to skills. For default we have Wood Chopper, Lumberman, nothing interesting here. Let's talk about the special Treenado. Deals very heavy nature damage, may poison target, may make target bleed. Treenado is a nature based attack that deals 65 damage to a single enemy, and it gives the enemy monster poison and bleeding. And what can I say about this skill other than I don't really like it. It deals 65 damage to a single enemy. If this would have been an AoE, it could have been a whole lot better. That 65 damage to a single enemy, poison and bleeding, that's going to be enough to one hit any enemy non-nature monster. But as for the nature monster, you're probably not going to be able to finish it off in one hit, which sucks because this is your ultimate attack. If this was special based, it could have been a whole lot more powerful, or if it was an AoE, or if it was an AoE and special based, it would have been insanely good. But this skill, Treenado as an ultimate, is just terrible, because later on in skills group 3, he actually has a skill that does exactly the same as this, except it deals 60 damage as opposed to 65, and of course the accuracy is 95 as opposed to 120, but seriously, for an ultimate attack, this is rather lame. And with that out of the way, we can move on to skills group 1. We have Rotten Axe, Lumberjack Habits, Clan William Cedar, nothing interesting in skills group 1, so let's move on over to skills group 2. So in skills group 2 we have African Baobab. Deals moderate nature damage, heals by 25%, requires cooldown. So here we have a nature based attack that deals 45 damage to a single enemy monster, it costs 27 stamina, it has a 2-turn cooldown, and it heals your life by 25%. Now myself personally, I am a huge fan when an attacker monster has an attack that deals damage and recovers your life. In this case, 45 damage isn't really that amazing, and having the 2-turn cooldown, that kinda sucks. Recovering 25% of your life is amazing, that's 1/4 of your life, and even though this skill isn't that powerful, once again it's only 45 damage, that's still okay because attackers tend to have AoEs. This monster also has an AoE, a 45 damage AoE based skill, so if you start the game off with a 45 damage AoE, on the following turn, you really don't need like a 60-70 damage skill, a 45 damage may be all you need, and in case you took any damage, you can recover your life with African Baobab and you're good to go. So for this skill, I personally would recommend it, but it comes down to your preference. Next up we have Germ Engineering, deals heavy nature damage, may poison target. Germ Engineering is a nature based attack that deals 50 damage to a single enemy monster, it costs 28 stamina and has no cooldown. On top of that, it'll poison the enemy monster. So overall this skill is nothing too amazing, it's just rather nice. It deals 50 damage, it poisons, it has no cooldown, that's great. If this skill would have been special based, I would have instantly recommended it, but because it's nature based, once again it's going to come down to preference whether or not you want to run this skill. And as for the final skill in skills group 2, Bloody Tetanus. May poison all targets, may make all targets bleed. This skill is an AoE skill that deals no initial damage, it costs 30 stamina and has no cooldown, and this skill will give the enemy monster poison and bleed for 4 turns. So poison and bleed, they both do the exact same thing. They reduce the enemy's health by 10% for 4 turns, and they reduce the enemy's damage output by 90% for 4 turns. So together, poison and bleeding, they do a grand total of reducing the enemy's life by 20% each turn. Their damage output is reduced by 38% for 4 turns, and in the course of 4 turns, they're going to be reduced by 80% of their total life. And this skill basically just has me going in circles. I shift between liking this skill and not liking this skill. I'm not really sure whether I can recommend it or not recommend it. I think the consensus right now is that it is an amazing skill, but there's some few things I don't like about it, and then there's things I obviously like about it. The thing I don't like about the skill is that it deals no initial damage. What's up with that? Fightreer is an attacker. If you were to run 2 strength runes, if you were to run 1 strength rune, you don't benefit from that initial damage output, so that sucks. But on the plus side, this skill doesn't have a cooldown, so you could use it whenever you have to. But you could also argue that poison and bleeding last for 4 turns, so you wouldn't really need to use this skill twice in a match. And I guess then you could counter argue that if an enemy removes negative effects, you could use it again, you could reapply Bloody Tetanus, but at the same time you could argue why not use a different skill to wipe out the enemy monsters instead of trying to apply DOT, which are all valid arguments. And as far as applying poison and bleeding together, I love that. Currently no monster is immune to bleeding, and poison, there are a few nature monsters that are immune to poison, so you may not be able to land that poison, in which case it'll only reduce the enemy's nature monsters damage output by 90% and their life by 10% for 4 turns, so that may not be the best. And so like I said, I shift between liking the skill and not liking the skill. That reducing the damage output by 38%, that is pretty darn insane. If you could give an enemy monster poison and bleeding, and then add on another effect like Daze, or Timerion's Time Machine, which reduces also by like 38%, or like Damage Reduction, which reduces by 25%, the enemy monsters are going to be really weak, and especially if they're running speedruns. Like I've seen it a lot when the enemy attacker's monster still runs 2 speedruns and a strength rune. If you reduce their damage output by 38%, that is way significant, and especially if they're all running all speedruns, this can be enough to prevent the enemy legendary monsters from taking out your common. So this skill can definitely come in handy, but overall I'm not sure if I can recommend it or not recommend it, and I'll talk more about that after I discuss skills group 3, and then you'll see why I'm saying I might not be able to recommend it. So anyways, moving on to skills group 3, we have Boys Dentel. Target heals by 40%, may apply damage boost to ally, may give precision to ally, requires cooldown. So this skill is a self skill that costs 30 stamina and has a high 3 turn cooldown, but the benefits are pretty great. You get heal, you get precision, and you get a slight damage boost. And even though this may seem kinda odd, I'm gonna say this is a must-have skill for this monster, specifically because he's a nature monster, and also because this skill alone makes this monster usable in Magic Wars as well as some Dark Wars, where the enemy deny monster is a monster that possesses. The whole reason I say this is a must-have skill is because basically when a monster has a self skill, it's pretty much like they're immune to possession. Normally when the enemy monster possesses you, all you have to do is click the little recharge button and you're fine. Now in the case of nature monsters, a very popular nature defense monster is Lao Mu, who does have a single possession. So if Lao Mu was to possess your Fightreer, you're fine. Instead of wasting the turn recharging, you can activate this skill, you can give yourself precision, and you can give yourself a damage boost. So the next attack is going to be extremely powerful and it's not going to miss because of that increased accuracy. And if you have precision and then follow it up with your AoE is also not going to miss. But at the same time you have a damage boost. So do you really want to waste a turn using Bloody Tetanus when you can use your other AoE skill that I'm going to talk about later on? That's one reason I don't like Bloody Tetanus when it comes to using Fightreer as an attacker. But again, I'll talk a little more about that once I discuss the other 2 skills. So next up is Body Chomp. Deals very heavy nature damage, may poison target, may make target bleed, requires cooldown. Body Chomp is a nature based attack that deals 60 damage to a single enemy. It costs 34 stamina, it has a 1 turn cooldown, it gives poison and bleeding. This is basically the ultimate attack except 5 damage weaker. And this is another must-have skill. If you have Fightreer, you better be running this skill. I absolutely love the skill, it is so darn phenomenal. And it goes without saying that Body Chomp can easily one-hit any enemy non-nature monster because it deals an initial 60 damage, and on top of that, if they survive, the poison takes 10%, the bleeding takes 10%, that's 20% of their life, that's 1/5 of their life. How can you not knock out an enemy with Body Chomp? This skill is so darn phenomenal, and I kind of feel like this skill is getting overlooked just because of its 0 cooldown AoE bleeding and poison skill, but Body Chomp is really where it's at in my opinion. This skill, okay, for those of you that don't know, if an enemy monster dies because of a DOT, the following monster in the turn sequence, that monster's turn is going to be skipped and it goes over to the following monster. So just think about the number of times you can use that to your advantage. Just seriously think about it. Instead of giving this monster the best runes, you could give him slightly lower level runes just so the enemy monster can die from poison and bleeding so that it can skip the following monster's turn. So if you're into calculating what monster is going to go first, how much damage you deal, this would really benefit you. So I'm going to give everyone an example of using Body Chomp successfully. Let's say you have a Deny monster, you have Fightreer, and you have a Nautilus 1, and your enemy has a Deny monster, an attacker, and a Nautilus 1 who's faster than your Nautilus 1. So their epic monster is going to go before your epic monster. Let's say your Deny monster goes first, it immobilizes the enemy Deny monster, and then it goes over to your Fightreer. Fightreer uses Body Chomp on the enemy attacker. It doesn't kill him, but it does leave him with poison and bleeding. And then it goes over to the enemy attacker, they get poison, they get bleeding, the enemy attacker dies. Normally it would go to Nautilus 1, the enemy Nautilus 1, but because the enemy attacker died from a DOT, it goes over to your Nautilus 1. So you successfully skip the enemy epic monster's turn, even though it was faster than you, and then your Nautilus 1 can just wreak havoc. Body Chomp is so darn amazing, I can't get over how good it is. Even in a scenario where like the enemy Deny monster is first, then your Deny monster is second, and then it's your attacker and then the enemy attacker. Think about it, the enemy Deny monster goes, maybe they denied your deny monster, okay? So you're in trouble there. And then it goes over to Fightreer, because you're faster than the enemy attacker. Fightreer uses body chomp on the enemy attacker, and they die because of the poison or bleeding, and it skips the next turn, so it would skip the enemy's deny monster. By the way, this is a scenario where it's like common, so the third monster doesn't matter, so it skips the enemy deny monster, so then it goes over to your deny monster, and now you can just deny the enemy deny monster. It is so darn fantastic. I love this skill. This is absolutely amazing. This is a must-have skill for sure. Okay, that was a mouthful. So anyways, we can all agree that this skill is phenomenal. Now the one thing about this skill, and the reason I don't like Bloody Tetanus once again, is because most games you would probably want to start off with body chomp. Why wouldn't you? It's a guaranteed one-hit kill, right? So let's say you do that guaranteed one-hit kill. On the following turn, do you really want to use an AoE that deals no initial damage against 2 enemy monsters? And especially in the Team Wars, if it's like a rarity below epic, so if it's rare, uncommon, or common, do you really want to use Bloody Tetanus just to apply DLTs? You're pretty much only targeting the legendary monster at that point, in which case it'd probably be better to use Germ Engineering or African Baobab, but really I don't see that much of a use for Bloody Tetanus. There's definitely scenarios where it can come in handy, I'll explain one later on, but again, like, Bloody Chomp is where it's at. After using Bloody Chomp, I really don't see much of a use for this skill. And with that being said, let's talk about the final skill, Moss Drown. Deals moderate special damage to all enemies, requires cooldown. So Moss Drown is just your 45 damage special based AoE, it costs 36 stamina, and it has a 3 turn cooldown. You may or may not want to run this skill. There's definitely situations when it can come in handy. The most obvious being if it's common for the rarity. Fightreer, if you use Moss Drown, you're definitely going to take out the enemy common monster, and you're going to be damaging the enemy nature monster and the other element monster. And then on the following turn, because both monsters already took a 45 damage hit, you could finish them off with African Baobab, Germ Engineering, or Body Chomp. Like, really anything is going to kill the enemy non-nature monster. So this is another skill you may or may not want to run. So when it comes to selecting skills, the two I recommend would be Boys and Body Chomp. These are the two must-have skills. Boys to counter Lao Mu, and Body Chomp because it is just a phenomenal skill. As for the last two skills, it's really up to you. For me personally, as a general rule of thumb, I love having an AoE skill on my attackers. So for me, I would probably choose Moss Drown. And once again, for me personally, because I love my nature monsters to be able to self-heal, I would probably go with African Baobab, just because of that 25% life heal. And once again, after you use Moss Drown, African is pretty much going to be all you need to wipe out the enemy non-nature monster. One bad thing about this monster is that he doesn't have any special base skills to use against the enemy nature monster, and of course you can always apply bleeding and poison. Maybe not poison because they might be immune to poison, but still lots of nature monsters can give themselves life regeneration, which recovers 15% of their life. So yes, they're still going to be losing life, assuming they have poison and bleeding, but still that's only 5%, and having nature attacks against a nature monster, that's not going to help you out, and you can't really rely on an AoE that has a 3 turn cooldown. So that's kind of unfortunate. I think if it came down to a one-on-one, Fightreer versus some other nature monster, you probably wouldn't be winning that battle. Although to be fair, the enemy probably wouldn't be able to beat you either, but at the same time, thanks to the time limit, you would lose. But anyways, that would be my skill set based on my preferences, and for that skill set, I would recommend 2 strength runes and a speed rune. If you want to go the route of using Bloody Tetanus, however, I'd probably have to go the route of recommending 2 speed runes and a strength rune, and that's just because this monster has a pretty low space speed compared to other monsters, so you'd want to make sure he goes first, at least before the enemy attacker. That way the enemy attacker has their damage output reduced, and they have poison and bleeding, which it could work in multiple situations. And the reason I'm not recommending 3 speedruns is just because an enemy Lao Mu or a Sarah, they're still going to go before you, so it doesn't really benefit you, unless you have better runes than the opponent obviously, but for the most part, if it's like same level runes, they're going to be going before you. But once again, if you do want to use Bloody Tetanus, it is totally possible, it is totally viable, but I just don't recommend using 2 strength runes because you're not really benefiting from the runes. Instead, 2 speed runes and a strength rune. Maybe you can make the argument for a speed, a life, and a strength, just to make them really durable and lasting a long time, but I'm really gravitating more towards the 2 speed runes. And so anyways, because I told you guys I would tell you a situation where this skill could come in handy, off the top of my head, I'm thinking about a Nature Fire War where the enemy has a Lao Mu and a Shalinar on defense, and then for offense, you can bring your Fightreer and you can bring Shalinar. So in that specific war, let's say the Lao Mu starts off with doing its possession skill. If she possesses Fightreer, you're kind of in trouble. If she possesses Shalinar, that doesn't matter, you have Inner Fire, you can give yourself an extra turn, and then do what I'm going to recommend. Or she can possess a rarity monster, which in that case, it doesn't matter, you're free to win the game. So in this situation, let's just say that Lao Mu possesses Shalinar, your Shalinar is now possessed, and let's just say that Fightreer and Shalinar are both faster than the enemy Shalinar. It's a lot of assumptions, but that's pretty much how the game works. There's never certainty because it all depends on what runes you have, what runes the opponent has. There's so many factors to depend on. But once again, this is a scenario where having Fightreer with Bloody Tetanus could work. So with Fightreer, you use your AoE Poison and Bleed. The enemy Shalinar is now Poison and Bleed. That's 20% of its life it's going to lose on the following turn. But it goes over to your Shalinar, you're possessed, it doesn't matter, you give yourself an extra turn, you give yourself double damage, you use your AoE Fire-based Burning attack. So now the enemy Shalinar is Poison, Bleeding, and it's burned. Not to mention, your Shalinar did an initial damage against the enemy Shalinar. And then when it's the enemy Shalinar's turn, because of that initial damage and all of the DLTs, it's most likely going to die. And like I said previously, when a monster dies because of a DLT, the following monster, the turn sequence is skipped. So assuming it was common for the rarity, or rare or uncommon, whatever, it doesn't matter. The enemy's Lao Mu's turn is going to get skipped, and it goes back to Fightreer. And then you can just use Body Chomp against the enemy Lao Mu, and then your Shalinar can just do Flame Piercer, and that's 3 coins for you. So that's one scenario when it can work, but again, it assumes you have better speedruns than the enemy Shalinar, and all these assumptions, but hey, it can definitely work. Once again, I recommend 2 speedruns and a strength rune. And one final point I want to touch on before ending this analysis, as far as putting this monster on defense, you might be thinking it's a really great idea because of the AI uses this skill. The enemy's monster's damage output is reduced by 38%, they're poisoned, they're bleeding. I don't think that's a great idea. Once again, because Lao Mu exists, because Lao Mu can possess you, you just imagine if Lao Mu possesses your Fightreer, and then the AI chooses this AoE skill, and then your whole defense team gets poisoned and bleeding thanks to the AI not being smart with the skills. Of course, if you run the skill, there is a chance it can just ignore the possession, but what is the chance of that? 25%? It's way too risky. I don't think this is a really good defense monster, but an offense monster, he really shines. And yeah, with that being said, that is going to conclude my analysis on Fightreer. Please let me know what you thought about this video. Let me know what you thought about the analysis. Do you disagree with some of the points? Do you agree with most of my points? Whatever's going on through your head, please let me know. Also, be sure to let me know what other monsters you want to see analyzed. And with that being said, remember to dream big and pursue your passions.